Hey there, I'm Lucas, and today I want to talk about focal reducers. So it's been a few years since I reviewed this little gem here. This is the original first version of the RJ Lens Turbo. I was very excited back then because this was the first focal reducer that came not from Mitakon and was affordable to buy, that came for the Micro Fourthirds system, which was very interesting for me as I was using the GH2 and the Micro Fourthirds version of the Blackmagic cinema camera back in that day. But times change and things evolve. So now also Mitakon released the Zhongyi line of lens turbos for the Micro Fourthirds system. Of course, they are available for Micro Fourthirds for quite some time now. And I actually also have this lens turbo here for quite some time, I think over a year, and I always wanted to make a review, but never found the time for it. Now I bought another one, and this is the Viltrox EF-M2 adapter, which is rather new and a bit hard to get because it's always on back order. I was lucky to get one. And I thought it would make the most sense to not only test these, but also compare them with each other, so you get more of a better perception what they can deliver and what not. So while I mainly want to talk about the Zhongyi and the Viltrox adapter here, I want to throw the RJ into this equation. One thing that the Viltrox has that none of the others I own has is electrical contacts. As you can see, we have the electrical here and on the front, and with this we can control the lens, which is surely very interesting if you have electronical lenses, but I don't have any. This is quite literally the only electronic EF lens that I own. This is the A2 55 kit lens from my old Canon 550D or T2i, which is EFS and which physically doesn't fit. It's not possible to connect this. So please don't ask me questions regarding the electronics of this adapter because I cannot answer them. So please look all the other great YouTube videos on the electronics, because I mainly want to focus on the optics. So looking at these adapters, you can already see some differences. Obviously the casing is a bit different. We have the electronics on the Viltrox, and we have this little lever here, and I think this is for changing the aperture. I have no idea because I don't have any electronic lenses. We have a USB port, and the biggest difference that we can compare with the other adapters is we don't have this like metal pin here, which seems to be some sort of stock piece. We have it on the RJ and slightly different on the Zhongyi. And here we have like this nicer felt plastic grip. Of course it's plastic, but it's better to grip, not as flimsy as it is here. The Viltrox comes with a foot, and we can detach it. There are only Allen screws in here. The foot has a 1/4 inch thread underneath, which is pretty neat for assembling somewhere. But also the foot is Arca Swiss compatible, which I find pretty interesting because I'm a big Arca Swiss fan, as you may know. So one thing that's also interesting is the size of the glass element, because the Viltrox and the RJ are roughly the same. Actually, the Viltrox has a bit of a larger back element, but the front is more or less the same. However, the Zhongyi, the Mitakon, is quite a lot smaller, not only the front, but also in the back. And I think this makes a difference for the image later on. I will show you in a minute what I mean. Something all of these adapters can do, and I think I also forgot to go about this in my earlier review, is to adjust for infinity focus. It doesn't even have to be infinity focus, it could just be that the focus get on the lenses off. Whatever it is that may not fit, you can just grab your whole lens group by the metal, of course, not by the glass, and screw it in or out to adjust for infinity focus. So one thing these adapters always have to fight with is wiggling, lens wiggling. So there is usually a very minimal wiggle. And this doesn't only happen with the cheap adapters like the Viltrox, the Zhongyi, or the RJ, or any other cheap EF adapter. This also happens with very expensive adapters like the Mitakon Speed Booster, and I had quite a lot of them on my cameras. I don't have any footage of this, but it's also quite wiggly. I actually found them to be a bit more wiggly than I would expect from an adapter that costs like quite a lot. Anyways, I tested all of my adapters, and even the very beat down RJ that I own doesn't wiggle very much. Basically every adapter I own here has a very tolerable amount of wiggle on the lens and on the camera body. And in the real world behavior, as long as you don't have a very stiff focus, you don't get any wiggle at all. So there are a few things I want to see from these adapters. The very first thing is the actual focal reduction that we have. Spoiler alert, there's a big surprise. Then I want to talk about the sharpness of these adapters, what they can deliver. I want to talk about the vignetting that we get, about the general flaring, so lens flares. And I want to talk about the blue spot issue that you may have heard of before. So let's hop to the test footage and listen to my very enthusiastic voiceover. When we compare the focal reducers to a shot of the lens alone, we can easily determine the actual focal reduction we are receiving. But before that, we can already tell that something's off here. The RJ and Viltrox are both labeled as 0.71 time focal reduction, the Zhongyi a bit less at 0.72 times. Still, it's pretty obvious that all of these adapters are not quite matching each other. Investigating this further, we can make out that the RJ reaches its designated factor of 0.71 times perfectly. The Zhongyi is a bit narrower, yet the Viltrox is actually wider. Measuring against a pure lens, we can make out a reduction of only 0.75 times on the Zhongyi. It doesn't deviate much, but it's still a bit of a bummer. The Viltrox, on the other hand, comfortably sits at 0.68 time reduction. This may not sound like much, but in the end it's a quite noticeable difference, as you can already see here. And comparing the Viltrox and the Zhongyi alone, that difference is around 10% additional reduction. The relatively low resolution GH5S I'm using here is obviously not the best camera to check the absolute sharpness with, but we can still get an idea what to expect. The RJ is the softest here, while the Viltrox takes the cake. When we look at the edges though, the results shift a bit. The RJ and Zhongyi don't lose much, while the Viltrox gets a bit smudgy. All adapters produce a bit of additional chromatic aberration here, but when we compare it to the naked lens on a sensor that delivers around the same field of view, it's not really much worse than without any focal reduction. Something you will already have noticed is the different behavior of color and contrast. For the RJ, the blue channel gets boosted less, so we result in a warmer yellowish image. Also, we lack in contrast compared to the unboosted lens. The Zhongyi delivers only around 3/4 of a stop of increased light intake, which makes sense given its smaller reduction factor. Also here we have a slightly reduced contrast and a very slight warm tint compared to the blank lens. The Viltrox is the only adapter to match the contrast properly, and while we still get a slight tint, it's the lowest of the bunch. Also, because it boosts the image a tad more, we receive a bit more than one additional stop. Awesome! Now let's have a look at the vignette. There's not much if anything to say about the RJ and Viltrox here. The Zhongyi on the other hand creates a noticeable vignette, even though it has the lowest reduction factor. I think this might also be caused by the smaller optical element I mentioned earlier. It's a bit hard to compare in absolute values. Around halfway from the center to the edge we get noticeably darker by a third of a stop. At the edge even darker, around 2/3 up to a whole stop depending on the aperture. As always, the vignette gets less pronounced the further we step down. No surprises here, all of the focal reducers deliver different lens flare compared to the naked lens. It's interesting to see how though. The RJ adds very saturated blue elements to the lens flare. These could be quite distracting in some cases. The Zhongyi has less pronounced green elements added into the mix, much less saturated and less distracting. The Viltrox also delivers less distracting and saturated elements, but also in blue just like the RJ. The blue spot is an issue we can sometimes see in cheap focal reducers. It happens because of internal lens flares, which means in many cases that it can be eliminated by using a matte box or setting up a flag. It happens mostly when you step down the lens and have a light source in your image. In the real world, I mostly encountered this in the front of monitors. To show it here, I had to provoke this by heavily stepping down the lens and filming directly towards the computer monitor. In this setup, the RJ produces the same name-giving blue spot in the middle of the frame, but we can also see that with blocking the right path, we can get rid of it. The Zhongyi really surprised me here. It didn't give me a blue spot, but a big bright smudge. But also in this severe case, if we can block the right area, we can get rid of it. The Viltrox also produces a slight blue spot, but it's more greenish than blue, also not very pronounced. Generally, all of these adapters can produce these internal reflections. This may seem like a bummer at first, but as it mainly happens when you heavily step down your lens and you can fix it by blocking light in the majority of cases, it usually isn't going to be an issue for starters. Again, I wanted to show this issue here in a blue spot brown scenario that you might rarely encounter in the real world. So what can I say? I'm really amazed by the Viltrox adapter. We get a really nice sharpness out of this adapter, we get a good contrast, we have a nice behavior of the vignette. Of course, the thing that amazes me the most is the wider image that we get. It's wider than advertised and also boosts the light more than advertised. So we have a brighter image, a wider image. So to me, obviously, this adapter is the clear winner in this comparison. So while I really liked to work with the Zhongyi in the past, it was a bit of a bummer in this comparison. Mainly because of the very hard vignette. I mean, I don't care too much about this vignetting stuff usually, but it's quite significant in comparison. It's good to know. The slight lack in contrast is also not too cool. Of course, the biggest bummer is the less than advertised reduction factor, which is not significantly. I mean, it's not by a large margin, but it still leaves a sour taste in my mouth. One thing I thought about though is that the factor that we get from this, which is 0.75 times, is the same that is advertised for the lens regain from Aputure. So maybe it's the same lens. I have no idea, but it's interesting to think about. Now the RJ, well, I didn't expect it to ace in this comparison. Of course, I only threw it in for some sort of comparison. I think the biggest issue it has obviously is the miscoloring that we get, the very large color shift. It could also be because of its age, I have no idea. But still, we meet the contrast. And one thing that all the others didn't match is the advertised reduction factor. So this one matches it pretty much perfectly, which is quite an accomplishment it seems. So I think that's it about cheap focal reducers. Big recommendation from me for the Viltrox adapter. Of course, the others are also cool. Just as the Viltrox is, I think, a bit better as a product. At some point I wanted to compare the Viltrox to the original Mitakon speed booster, but I don't know anyone who has one, and I'm never really feeling like renting something for such a test because I'm not interested in buying one because they are far too expensive for my taste. But if you happen to live in Berlin or at least the closer area and you have a Mitakon speed booster, regardless if it's the XL or the Ultra version, I'm interested in both, and you want to compare it to the Viltrox, or you just want me to owe you something, please hit me up so maybe we can arrange something, test it against each other. I think this would be quite interesting. In any case, thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you found this useful. I actually learned quite a bit doing these tests, yeah, I hope to see you next time. Bye.